Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always taught I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game, and you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now this week we've got a fairly exciting show. This is going to be my pre-Worlds podcast. I'm going to be taking you through everything you need to know for the main event at Worlds and just generally, and I'm going to be running you through the grinder. And I don't usually try and big myself up too much. There's a certain blog on the internet which is suffering from a severe case of up yourself. We all know the one I'm talking about. But what I am going to say this week is I'm going to be giving you information about the grinder, tips about the grinder, and it's coming from someone who got through the grinder last year. So if you are entering the grinder especially, I would wait until that bit of the podcast comes up or skip to that bit, because quite frankly I think I'm in a good position to give you advice about that. So starting off, as always, with some news. And the first and most exciting piece of news that's come out this week is that we know what's going to be in Plasma Blast, our August set. The set list has been released, and if you go on websites such as PokeBeach.com and presumably Bulbapedia, then you'll be able to see some scans of these cards. Nothing too exciting, it's pretty much as we expected. The 10 EXs are now confirmed, exactly as I'd predicted, as the 5 EXs from Meloetta with their full art counterparts, and the Kyurem EX, just regular, not black or white Kyurem, with the that came from the Blastoise half deck in Japan. It's moderately playable. I'll talk about it more in a couple of weeks. What is very, very interesting in this set is the trainers. We are getting a reprint of Energy Retrieval, so Blastoise players rejoice. We are getting reprint of Rare Candy, which we don't really need because there will be one which is going to be legal, but, you know, I suppose it's handy to have for the future. The weird ones we're getting, though, we are getting reprints of Professor Juniper and Pokemon Catcher, two cards which were going to be kept in the format. I believe they were both reprinted in Dark Explorers, Juniper as an uncommon and Pokemon Catcher as a secret rare. What we're not getting is Crushing Hammer and Energy Switch, so Darkrai players might be time to start crying. In a few weeks' time, it's going to be a few weeks till I get time for this, but I'm probably going to have a look at Darkrai. I'm going to try it without Energy Switch, and to be honest, I'll probably put a couple games up on my YouTube channel if you want to have a look at that. Blastoise players happy, Darkrai players unhappy. So yeah, that's what we're getting in Plasma Blast. We are once again not getting Meloetta EX, so whether we're indeed ever going to see that Meloetta EX is at the moment very much up in the air. Remember the EX Battle Boost EXs, Chandelure and Excadrill, we don't know if we're getting them or not, so maybe we'll get Meloetta at the same time as them. For anyone that's forgotten, the Meloetta EX was, when Japan they had Shiny Collection, just like they had their Dragon Volt, or Dragon Selection as they called it, which we got as a standalone Dragon Volt. Now they got Shiny Collection as a second kind of set like that, and that had Meloetta EX in, which has never actually been released in this country. Still no word of whether we're getting Shiny Collection in the same way as we got Dragon Volt, or how we're getting Meloetta EX at all. But just to let you know, Rare Candy, Juniper and Catcher are getting reprints even though we didn't need them. Energy Retrieval's getting a reprint which we did need, but we are not getting reprint of Energy Switch or Crushing Hammer, which means bearing any weird reprint, weird sets, etc., we are not going to be having those cards legal for our Battle Roads. Now, the other thing that's been released is that one of the theme decks, we're getting a Volcarona and a Genesect theme deck, as I previously told you. Now, we don't have the Genesect theme deck yet, but we do have the Volcarona theme deck. And there's a Frostlass in there, which, as I'll tell you in a couple of weeks, is pretty cool. What we are getting is a Pokemon Catcher, which means we are going to have Pokemon Catcher in a theme deck. Now, Japan got Pokemon Catcher in theme deck ages ago. We haven't. We only had Pokemon Catcher printed in Emerging Powers, and as I told you at the time, the pull rate for Pokemon Catcher was drastically lower than usual. In your average box, with your average uncommon supporter or trainer, you would expect to see something like a playset in each box, whereas in this particular Emerging Power set, you only got 2 or 3, often only 2, certainly in my box and my friend's box, 2 Pokemon catchers per set. So what we're getting here is Pokemon catcher becoming more readily available. Good for people who don't have enough, bad for people who are hoarding them. So if you've got Pokemon catchers that you don't need lying around, I would recommend getting rid of them for any price you can that's half decent in the near future, because they're going to become a hell of a lot more common. So that is the Plasma Blast. Another tiny piece of news this week. I've written a new article. It's up on 6prizes.com. It's about Quad Snorlax pre and post rotation. So if you get 2 minutes to spare and you haven't done so already, pop yourself over to 6prizes.com. It is still the best website around for strategy articles and the such. And it's the best kind of written website by a mile, I would say. It's the only one that I write for regularly, although I have written for others. So get yourself over there, have a look at that article. I think it's worth a read. And just while I'm pushing myself for a second, if you haven't already, go check out my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search PTCGRadio. I'm getting up near 150 subscribers, which I'm happy with, but I want more. By the time this podcast goes out, there will be a new video up there of me playing Darkrai against a Durant deck, so you can see whether Durant can match up to Darkrai or not. It's worth a watch. I think it's a pretty good one. There are going to be more videos going up, but as I've said, I am actually off to Spain in the morning, so the YouTube videos are going to be slowing down. There aren't going to be many of them going up in the next couple of weeks. But as soon as I come back from Spain, I'm going to do a little flurry. There's going to be ones going up, I would say, for a couple of weeks, probably going up daily. So you've got that to look forward to. Speaking of which, my last little piece of news, as I mentioned last week, this, if you're listening to it on the day it goes out, you will be listening to this episode of PTCG Radio early. There will not be an episode next week. That's why today is my pre-World show. And I'll be back in 2 weeks' time with my post-World show, going over everything we learned from Worlds, and then we'll be on to Plasma Blast and everything after that. Loads of good stuff coming up. So what I'm going to start with is what I would call random World stuff. Now, one thing you'll find at Worlds is they've got a shop, and that shop is wonderful. You can get playmats and potentially deck boxes. Most of what you get in the competitor's bag you will be able to buy in the shop, although you'll generally find that the t-shirt and hat are a different colour, so that the competitors have their own competitor hat and shirt. Similarly, you'll find that some things, like for instance the pin badge last year and the luggage tag, are exclusive to the competitor's bag, although the luggage tag did actually end up being sold as a kind of extra bonus for people who bought a lot towards the end of the week. What you'll find about the shop is that the queues are horrendous. I went out with a friend last year and she was waiting for hours and hours to get in. I think she queued for about 4 hours to get into the shop. It is worth it. You'll find that as the weekend wears on, the queues in the shop go down drastically, but by then the awesome stuff like the playmats will be sold out. A personal plea from me: please don't go to the shop to sell on eBay. The mats always run out of stock. By all means, go on the last day and buy a bunch of stuff to sell on eBay that's still left over, but don't be that guy that goes and buys 5 or 6 playmats and sells them on eBay so that other people turn up late and can't get a playmat. Nobody likes that guy. Don't be that guy. The other thing, which I heartily recommend you do try when you get out to Worlds, is the League. Now, last year it was in a little adjoining room. 2 years ago in San Diego, they had 2 rooms. And what the League was, and I hope they're doing it again this year, I can only assume they will, because I'm told they do it every year. You go along, you play a game, you go up, you get a ticket, you play a game, you go up, the winner gets surprised, the loser gets surprised. Picked at random. Sometimes you'll get a couple of cards, other times you'll get a booster pack. I only actually indulged in one game last year because Friday I was grinding, Saturday I was playing. I didn't take advantage of League. When I went, I played with my friend, we played one game. We then got given, I think, 4 packs of cards between us for one game. My friend Mike went out last year in one day through various things, and he didn't spend too huge amount of the League. He got very lucky. He walked away with a playmat, a secret rare Rayquaza, and a gold catcher, I believe. And I think he might have got a full art Darkrai as well. Regardless, he got a ridiculous amount of stuff. Some people get luckier than others, but the League last year and the year before, I'm told, was a lot of good stuff. And the best thing about League, you can meet random people. I met loads of people at Worlds. Now, the one thing I am going to have to say, and should be apparent by now, I'm not going to Worlds this year. Although I haven't earned my invite, there's various reasons, but I'm having to miss Worlds this year. I don't see myself missing Worlds next year, no matter where it is. I can imagine myself being there, and I can only apologise to all those people. It might sound kind of vain, but I have had a number of people get in touch with me asking if they're going, saying they'd love to meet me, have a game and all that. I can only apologise, I'm not going out this year. However, I am very much planning to go next year. All of my international listeners I haven't got a chance to meet, I would love to meet you all, so try and get yourself out there next year. I'm currently planning to see what I can do with PTCGRadio there next year, and I've got a whole year to think up wonderful ideas. Now, there are a couple of people who have offered to help me out with videos and information from Worlds. You know how to get in touch with me. Tweet me at the Wassy. Email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or find me on YouTube and leave a comment. Anyone who's going out to Worlds who listens to this, I am after anything you can give me. If you take pictures, email them to me. If you record video, email it to me or send me a link. If you don't know how to send large videos, send me an email. There's a wonderful website called WeTransfer where you can send really large videos really easily over the internet, so I can tell you how to do that. If you interview anyone and get some audio, send it my way. Anything you can do that you want to do, please send it to me. Even if you just want to send me a tournament report after the fact, any person who's listening to this is going out to Worlds, anything you can give me, pictures, videos, interviews, your own personal accounts, tournament reports, send it my way. Twitter at the Wassy, email ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. I would love to hear anything from Worlds, get any extra information. A few people have offered, and my answer is, for the love of God, yes, anything you can give me. Now, before I get on to telling you what decks I think you should or should not play at Worlds, I'm going to start with a little disclaimer. And basically what I'm saying is, you need to think what you actually want to achieve. Now, I'll talk about the grinder afterwards. For now, I'm talking about the main event. And my message to you is, before you go out there, think about what you're actually aiming for. And the reason I say this is because nothing usual ever wins Worlds. Worlds is won by weird decks, or by decks you're expecting with weird lists. So, from everything I've seen, if you want to win Worlds, if your aim is to win Worlds, you've got to do something a little bit different. I'm going to take you through the last 4 years. In 2012, last year, Igor Costa from Portugal won Worlds. What did he play? He played Darkrai Mewtwo, just like everyone else in the top 4. Except he played it with Super Scoop Up and Prism Energy and Terrakion. If you look at his list, it looks inconsistent, and the Top Cut recorded some games last year, and again his deck at times looked a little bit slow and blah blah blah. And if you go back and look, Harrison Levin basically played himself out of the final and maybe should have won, etc. Nobody cares because he didn't win. If Harrison's listening or any of his friends, that's not a slight to him. He came second at Worlds. That dude's an amazing player. What I'm saying is, Igor Costa actually won, and that's what I'm worried about. And his list was weird. If you sat down before the top 4, you could have said that Igor had an advantage due to the fact that he was the only one playing Terrakion. But similarly, you could have said, I don't like Igor's list, it looks inconsistent. Similarly, you can go to the top 4, where Harrison Levin beat Jay Hornung, and he was playing all kinds of weird techs, where Jay was playing a consistency-focused list. If you're playing to get into Top Cut, focus on consistency. Because you'll probably get into Top Cut, and Top Cut will be filled with consistent Darkrai and Gothitelle and Blastoise lists and Plasma lists. But the decks that win, as Igor showed last year, were weirder. Let's go back a little bit further, 2011. David Cohen won Worlds with Magnaball. And he won with a weird deck, because Magnaball was everywhere at Nationals, and come Worlds, everyone had basically said, Magnaball is finished. It wasn't the deck we thought it would be. Not only that, but if you look at David Cohen's Magnaball list, it had twins. At the time, everyone was playing Pokémon Reversal, except for David Cohen. And he focused more on Reshiram than attacking with Magnezone. He played a deck which people didn't think was good enough to win Worlds, and he played a weird list, and what happened? He won Worlds. That same year, Ross Cawthorn made The Truth the roguest deck that's probably ever been seen anywhere, let alone Worlds, and he got all the way to second, and probably was it not for time, would have ended up as a world champion. Let's take you back further, 2010, Yuta Komatsuda. He won with Luxchomp. Luxchomp was the best deck in format. But I played a game against my friend using his world championship deck, the one that was printed. And she said, is that all the basic energy he plays? She tried playing a game and she played Luxchomp quite a lot. It was a weird list. There was very little basic energy. He played Professor Oak's New Theory that nobody played in Luxchomp. He played a deck which was common, but he played a really, really odd list. And it was probably by virtue of his odd list that made him win. And let's go back one more year. Let's go to 2009 with Steven Silvestro. With his Beedrill, with Luxray. Yeah, Beedrill was a deck. Yeah, Luxray was a thing. But that particular deck was not a well-known deck, was not a widely played deck, and he took it all the way to winning the World Championship. So, my message remains that if you want to just top cut, if what you're looking for is top cutting worlds, and that's your aim, then play a consistent deck. Play an archetype, play a consistent deck, playtest load, get it to beat the top decks, you'll probably make it into cut. But if you want to win worlds, you have to take a chance. Now, on a smaller scale, I took a very unusual deck to Nationals this year. I played the wrong matchups, I flaked out, I finished negative for the first time, and I don't really care about that, because I know that if I'd gotten into top cut, I would have had pretty much, unless I'd run into the two Blastoise, I'd have had favourable matchups for the rest of the day, and I could have gone far into cut. I took a chance, didn't make it into cut, I'm happy with that. Similarly, David Cohen could have completely flaked out against certain decks last year. It happened. 2 years ago. So, that's my message for winning Worlds. So let's have a look at Worlds decks then. Really, at this stage, there are 4 big decks that should be on everyone's radar. And they are Gothitelle, Plasma, Blastoise, and Darkrai. So looking at Gothitelle, this is a deck which rose to prominence when it won, I believe, Norwegian Nationals. Don't quote me on that, I could be wrong. I think it was Norway Nationals. And then everyone was like, meh, it's not all that good. And then it didn't do much, to be honest, for a few Nationals. And then all of a sudden, it came into US Nationals, and it owned, and then it ended up taking home the whole thing. It is an amazing deck, which got good matchups against Darkrai and against Plasma, and it's got a pretty even matchup against Blastoise. It really comes down to, can you get a Gothitelle out before they get a Blastoise or even a Caldeo with 3 or 4 energy on? It's a very, very good deck. However, people are gunning for it. If you get loads of Darkrai with 2 Caldeo in, loads of Blastoise, loads of Plasma that are tried to gear towards it, people playing... I mean, for instance, if you take a... Like I said last week, if you take a Plasma list and you stick 2 Aldino in, you can probably beat Gothitelle. Because you'll get a couple early prices, you'll get 2 chances to break the lock, and you'll probably beat Gothitelle. So, Gothitelle is the best deck in the format, and if everybody plays decks like they played at US Nationals, Gothitelle will be an amazing deck to play. But one thing you should bear in mind, the deck that wins US Nationals usually doesn't win Worlds, and there's a reason for that. Similarly, I mean, if you look back to last year, let's take last year as an example. John Roberts, he went and played Kling Klang for US Nationals. He went and won the whole thing. Came around to Worlds, everyone played Lost Remover, he finished 4-3 and missed cut. Same thing could happen here. I think I told you last week about an article I read where somebody was saying, yeah, but you could just stick in 2 Lost Remover to beat Kling Klang. You can't do that against Gothitelle. That's rubbish. If you've got 2 spots in your deck that you can put towards beating Gothitelle, stick 2 Aldino in and you'll probably beat Gothitelle. If you're playing Darkrai, stick 2, or if you want to show off, stick 3 Caldeo in. Yes, you can't search out the Caldeo or the Aldino without Pokémon search, but if you can get, say, a Kyurem on the bench with 1 Darkrai, 1 Deoxys, all you need to do is pull or Juniper or whatever, get yourself that Aldino out, and you kill a Gothitelle. Because you break the lock, you get the Kyurem active, you're sorted. So, although do remember, if you're playing Aldino, it gets rid of 1 special condition, not both. And people at Worlds, and this made me really sad when I played last year, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before, people at Worlds, unfortunately, near the top tables, they take it very seriously, and I suppose the prizes are big, so they probably should. People will not let you off little things. That's fine, they shouldn't. But there are some people at Worlds, and I told you about my experience last year, who will try and bait you into stuff. And if you play down an Aldino, make very, very clear that you are getting rid of paralysis, not poison. Your opponent might call you on it. They might do something as simple as say, well, you didn't turn your Pokemon up right, so it must still be paralysed, you must have chosen to get... or something like that. As a side note, and this is important to say, along the same lines, when you're at Worlds, be very, very pedantic. If you're playing Blastoise, do not just put a water energy down, because if you put a water energy down without saying Deluge and then try and put an electric energy down, you'll probably get called on it. Say Deluge. Say Rush In. Make it very, very clear what you are doing, because some people there are only there to win, and they don't care about playing the game. And maybe I'm naive in thinking that Worlds should be the funnest, most exciting tournament of the year, and that it shouldn't all be about winning. Maybe I am naive. But please heed my warning. So moving on from Goth, we've got Plasma. Plasma is your kind of starter for 10 deck this year. I mean, yeah, the bits are quite expensive, but let's face it, by now if you want to play Plasma and you're going to Worlds, you'll have the stuff. It's fast, it's techable, but to be honest with you, it is very vulnerable to N. The mirror match can be random, and I speak as a man who sat at Nationals this year and watched games where, without being rude to any individuals, better players lost to worse players because they didn't get the drop of the cards in the same way that the other player did. So please heed my warning along those lines. I say heed my warning, but you know what I mean. Please be careful if you play Plasma. Plasma's good, but again, it can be teched against. Darkrai players can play Enhanced Hammer. It doesn't have a great Gothitelle matchup, because when they get set up, you basically lose. If you're playing Plasma, I'm still a fan of the Promo Landorus. I'm just putting it out there. I like the Promo Landorus. It's good against Darkrai, and it's fairly good in the mirror. Yes, it gets killed by Kyurem, but it runs off the same blend energy as Kyurem does. So I think it's worth dropping in there. And a quick note about Plasma lists. A lot of people now, and this seems to be the best way to play it, they are moving towards lists focused on Kyurem and Absol as attackers with one or two Thunderous in there to accelerate energy. And that really seems to be the way to play it. Focus on Kyurem and Absol, and I would even go as far as to say Promo Landorus. If you can get 3 or 4 Deoxys out and match hand sizes with your opponent, you're one-hitting a Darkrai or a Thunderous for 2 energy, and one of them can be done with a Colress machine. I like Promo Landorus, but that's what you want to be focusing on. Do make sure that you can beat the mirror, do make sure that you can beat Darkrai. Gothitelle, it's gonna be awkward either way. So, that's that out of the way. Darkrai, he's kind of fallen back a little bit, to be honest with you. He was a brilliant deck, and it came around to Nationals. In US Nats, it didn't make much of a splash. But here's the thing about Darkrai. It's not got a great Blastoise matchup. It will never have a great Blastoise matchup. But Blastoise, I think, is kind of dipping in popularity. And I think going into Worlds may take a further dip in popularity. And it's still got that inconsistency problem. But Darkrai, you stick in 2 Enhanced Hammers, and you've probably, I would say, got a favourable matchup against Plasma. Hammer spamming probably won't win, but what you can do is look that they've got a Kyurem with 2 energy on, you knock off the coloured energy, they can't Blizzard Burn next turn. You staring down a Lugia, knock off the DCE, they might not be able to get it going next turn. You're looking down a Deoxys, you can either knock out the Plasma energy to limit them to 30 damage, or knock out the coloured energy to limit them to... And they'll only be working on Prism because it'll be the different blend energy to Kyurem. And all of a sudden, they can't do the attack at all. So, something to bear in mind there. The other thing is, you stick in 2 Caldeo, maybe even 3 Caldeo, and I would say you've got a favourable Gothitelle matchup. Yeah, you can't search the Caldeo out, but if you play enough supporters, sooner or later, you're going to end up drawing into that Caldeo. But don't drop it until you need it. If you drop down a Caldeo when you don't need it, they're going to capture it and poison it. Keep it in your hand. Wait till you've got a Darkrai or something built up on the bench, or an Absol preferably, because an Absol's going to be brilliant in that matchup. And then all you need to do, drop a Caldeo with a Dark Energy, rush in, retreat, attack. Ideally, hold it till you've got 2. They cannot capture and kill both of them. So try and do it so you get one turn and one the next, or both on the same turn, and then you should be beating Gothitelle. The last of the big decks is Blastoise. Now Blastoise is still good. It's still got a good Gothitelle matchup, but the thing you will find with Blastoise is that if Gothitelle gets going early, if they get the lock turn 2 or they get the lock before you, then you're probably still going to you're still probably going to lose. So, and you've still got the donking problem, and you've still got the being rushed problem. You're probably not going to face much Klinklang or Rails, which have always been your worst matchups. I don't see Blastoise as a good bet for Worlds, but similarly, I do see a couple of Blastoise being in cut. Just not many of them. So they're your 4 big decks. Of the big decks, I'm giving it out now. I'm not saying this is going to win, but I think the best deck, if I were going, I'd be playing Darkrai, unless I was playing some weird rogue thing. But because I'm not going, I haven't been working on rogues, so... But I'd be going with Darkrai. I'd put 2 Enhanced Hammer in, I'd put at least 2 Caldeo in, and then I would say you've got a favourable Plasma, a favourable Goth, and I think that'll be the 2 most popular decks. Now, you're probably giving up the mirror match there. Never mind. Similarly, you've still got a bad Blastoise matchup, but I wouldn't care about that. To be honest, I'd be tempted to drop the lasers, put in 4 Enhanced Hammer, and like 3 Caldeo, and just basically go for Darkrai and say, if I play the mirror, maybe I'll lose, but maybe I'll get a better start and win. Lasers aren't the be-all and end-all. I've got loads of Caldeo, so that laser's only ever going to do 30 anyway. But I'd be going in with a Darkrai list that beats Plasma and beats Gothitelle, and I'd be taking my chances. Again, maybe it's not the best deck there, but you can hit the kind of matchups, and that can do well. If you want and if anyone really wants a list, and I'm not going to Worlds this year, so if you go to Worlds, you've probably got a better list than I have. But if anyone wants a Darkrai list, a fast Darkrai list with multiple Enhanced Hammer and Caldeo, give me a shout, I'll be happy to send it out. Maybe I'll tweet it out or something. So, there are other decks out there. Now, I'm going to mention these in passing. These are the kind of decks where you can play them, and if you get the right matchups, you'll be having a very friendly time at Worlds, but they are not necessarily the best decks to go for. So first of all, Klinklang. Klinklang's nice and simple. It's been around for ages. It's got a good Plasma matchup, a good Darkrai matchup, and a wonderful Blastoise matchup. It has almost no Gothitelle matchup whatsoever. You are going to give them time to set up. You've got nothing. You're not one-hitting anything. You're not breaking the lock. You're too dependent on trainers. If you play Klinklang, you might get lucky, because you'll have pretty much all favourable matchups except for Gothitelle, and you may well get into cut. And if you want to just cut, maybe this is a good deck to play. But you'll probably meet a Gothitelle in cut, and you will then lose. Pretty much guaranteed. Rails, I still like Rails. I'm gutted it's being rotated out. I think it's a pretty good shout for Worlds, because it's good against Darkrai unless you get rushed. It's good against Plasma unless you get rushed, and to be honest, against Plasma, there's probably a 50-50 chance or more that you will get rushed. It's good against Gothitelle, because you can use Raikou to snipe the Exalgors. And it's amazing against Blastoise and things like Klinklang. But it's still got that donking problem. It can still be rushed. I think Rails is a brilliant shout, but if you play too many Darkrai and Rails that go off too fast, you're going to lose. Garbodor. I think it's well poised, but again, it's got a problem with Gothitelle. It can beat Darkrai and Blastoise and Plasma, especially if you put the right attackers in for Plasma, but I don't know. I worry that it can beat Gothitelle, and I worry that now that Life Dew's around, everyone's going to be playing Tool Scrapper, which makes Garbodor worse. One thing I think you should put in Garbodor is Mewtwo. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Flareon. Oh, sorry, quickly, regular Eels, the one that won Dutch Nationals. The surprise factor's gone, it's got a terrible Goth matchup, I don't like it, I wouldn't play it, I'd go Rails. That's all I'm going to say about that. If you've got Nuts of Steel, my recommendation, Flareon. Now, I've put a couple of Flareon games up on PTCGO on my YouTube channel. Check them out. I love Flareon. It's not got a great Blastoise matchup, but if you play it with 4 Mewtwo like I have, it can hold its own. I've got a Flareon Blastoise matchup, but I don't think I'm going to be able to put it up online before Worlds. But if I do, check that out. And to be honest, it probably hasn't got a great Darkrai matchup. But it's got a really good Gothitelle matchup, like a really good Gothitelle matchup, as in it pretty much auto-wins Gothitelle, unless they get going so fast you can't set up because of your trainers. Not great against Blastoise, dodgy against Plasma, dodgy against Darkrai. It's not got the best matchups out there, but Flareon's a kind of deck where with a decent start you can beat anything. I don't think it's a great deck for Worlds, I don't think it'll win, I don't think it would probably even cut. But if you can get a decent... And again, I've got a Flareon list if anyone wants it, but... Once again, not going to Worlds. You've probably got a better list than me if you're considering it. But I love Flareon. I love it. I think it's a fun thing to go for. If you want my outside bets for World, Rails and Flareon. If you want my actual recommendation for World, Darkrai with at least 2 or 3 Caldeo and 4 Enhanced Hammer. To be honest, you might have to cut out lasers to fit them in. I don't care. As far as I'm concerned, I think it beats Plasma and it beats Gothitelle, and they are the 2 main decks you're going to face. They're going to be the 2 biggest threats at Worlds. If you put enough Absol in, you've got a decent Klinklang matchup if that comes about. And yeah, you've got problems with Blastoise and potentially with Darkrai Mirror, but if you build it fast enough with Bicycle and stuff, and again, cut the lasers, you might have a bit of extra room. I like it. And to be honest, if I was going out to Worlds next weekend, or the weekend after, I'd be running Darkrai. Which is weird, because I haven't run in any tournament so far. Except last Nationals, I ran it with Groudon, but the less said about that, the better. There was only one player in the world that could play it with Groudon, and it weren't me. Although, he made top 32 at Worlds with it. So, I've told you about my outside decks, now I'm going to tell you about my outside techs. 2 things which I think could make a splash at Worlds this year. Firstly, guess this. I mentioned this on the podcast before. That supporter which you look at your opponent's hand and they shuffle all the trainers back in, and you get to draw 1 card per trainer that they shuffled in. I like this card. I think you run a couple of these, maybe with random receiver. It needs to be run not just as a one-off, but as a, I am going to use this to disrupt my opponent. But turn 1 gets this against most decks. Things like Darkrai and Plasma, maybe Gothitelle and Blastoise if they're holding Rare Candy and Ultra Ball or whatever. It's wonderful. My other one, Mewtwo. Now, Mewtwo is wonderful against Gothitelle. Mewtwo DCE, it donks a Gothita. And with a laser, it'll donk, I believe it'll donk a Duskull, etc., etc. It puts really, really fast pressure onto Gothitelle to the point where they might not be able to catch up. It's also really good against Deoxys. And yeah, Deoxys can one-hit you back for 2 energy, but then Mewtwo with just a laser DCE can. Deoxys needs 2 energy, one of which has to come from Colress Machine, and one of which needs to be a Prism. And I know some people are playing Absol now, so they're playing the other blend energy, but you've probably got 4 or 5 energy in there, and you need a Colress Machine to get it going in 1 turn. The Mewtwo player needs DCE Laser, which they're probably going to find more easily. I take Mewtwo over Deoxys in that war. Just putting it out there. So, that's the main event at Worlds. Now I'm going to finish off by giving you a few words about the Grinder. So, in an article I was reading on a website recently, 6 prizes as it happens, the Grinder was described as the most brutal tournament of the year, and it is. And the reason is, there's no second chances in the Grinder. You play someone in a best of 3, you lose, you're out. Simple. So, you can't play anything with auto losses. You can't play anything with really bad matchups. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about my choice for last year, which was successful, and then I'm going to run through what we should maybe do this year. So, last year it was a wash with Darkrai decks, mostly Darkrai Mewtwo. There was a bit of CMT, and there was a bit of Eels, and then there were some weird decks, the most worrying of which was Vileplume with Excelgor and Chandelure and all those. So, I knew that Darkrai was a deck to beat. So what I did was I made CMT with Terrakion, and I tested, and I tested, and I tested until it beat Darkrai. And it beat Speed Darkrai very easily. Darkrai Mewtwo was harder, but I tested with my friend George, who was playing Darkrai Mewtwo, and I got that matchup down to a T. Now, I actually ended up playing 2 Darkrai Mewtwo and 1 Speed Darkrai in the grinder, and over the 3 best of 3s I dropped a single game, and I took Darkrai 6-1. I think I then played 2 Darkrai in the main event and beat both of them as well. The point being, I made a deck which beat Darkrai with a Alpha Terrakion. Then, I turned my attention to the other games. Now CMT, I knew there was a mirror matchup. And when I looked at it, I basically realised that CMT relies very heavily on Smeargle, 70 HP, Celebi, 60 HP, and Shaman, 70 HP. So my list had no regular Tornadus in. I focused on Tornadus EX, and I put a couple of plus power in, and my list was focused on Tornadus EX. So I didn't need Celebi. I played it like the Troll deck at the time, which played no energy acceleration, just EXP share, etc. I played my deck as, I'm running Tornadus EX, but I've got Celebi here just in case I need it. So when I played against the CMT Mirror, as I did in the first round of the grinder, it was a case of Tornadus, DCE, and just kill all the little things. Just kill all the little things and take the win that way. And it worked, and I took that series 2-0. The other deck that I had to worry about was Eels. Now, Eels was my weakest matchup, but I figured it wasn't the end of the world, because Eels wasn't as highly played as Darkrai, and was probably about the same played as CMT. So I got myself into a situation where I could go 50-50 with Eels. I actually played Chase Maloney's Eels in the open play area the day before the grinder, and he went on to win seniors with Eels, and I beat his Eels list. Now, I also got destroyed by my friend Luke's list, game after game after game, but he was playing a Speed Eels list, the likes of which no one else was playing, so I wasn't too worried. So I found the best deck in the format, and I found a deck that beat it. And after I had a deck that beat it, I then tweaked that deck so I could beat the other main decks. Now, I didn't have a 100% win rate or anything stupid like that, but I was going 70-80% against Darkrai, 60-70% against the Mirror, and about 50% with Eels. Now, I still needed a huge amount of luck, but the point was, that gave me a deck that I could take into the grinder that gave me a very, very good chance. That meant if I got the lucky breaks, I could have a good run through the grinder. That was my thought process last year. Now, there was also that Varplume deck I told you about, but that had big problems with time, and this was 75 minutes. And I'm not ashamed to say that what I did last year was I bought a watch. And I took that watch into the grinder, and I knew that if I played against this deck, I would lose one game very, very slowly. I believe it was 60 minutes, actually, not 75. But anyway, I would play very, very slowly, and then lose, get 4 prizes up, and then time would run out in the last game, and I'd win on sudden death. It's not a great tactic. Some might say it's a bit of a mean tactic, but I don't care. That's what I would have done. Didn't need it, but that's what I would have done. So going from last year back to this year, what decks can you go? Well, it's the main decks again. Now, I've already talked about all the decks in great detail, so I'm not going to repeat myself. What I'm going to say is, Gothitelle, I don't think is a grinder deck. Main one, sure, it's not a grinder deck. The reason is, quite simply, you've got time issues, it can be donked, and it can be rushed, by which I mean too many things knocked out. It's too inconsistent to use in the grinder. You can take a loss or two in the main event, you can't take a loss or two in the grinder. You're out. Don't play Gothitelle. Blastoise is a very, very good deck, but I'm going to tell you that when it got to best of 3 in US Nationals, Blastoise didn't last long. It didn't make it past top 16. A similar kind of thing happened at UK Nationals. Now, Sammy Sakoum made it all the way to the final. That's Sammy Sakoum. And I don't think Sammy listens to this podcast. I know he's listened occasionally, but he doesn't listen often. So the chances are, if you're listening to this, you're not Sammy Sakoum. So don't play Blastoise in the grinder. So, same thing with Kling Klang. Kling Klang, it loses to Gothitelle. It loses to Rails with Victini, etc. Now, the other thing about the grinder is there's going to be weird decks. Last year there were Groudon decks, there were Vanillux decks, there was all kinds of weird decks. And generally, by the time you get to the latter rounds of the grinder, these decks are gone. By the time you get to the latter rounds of the grinder, it's going to be Gothitelle, Blastoise, Darkrai, Plasma. But until you get there, you might have some weird decks. You don't want to lose. I mean, you could play Gothitelle and get a flurry on round 1, for goodness sake. There's no really accounting for that. But don't play decks of auto losses. To be honest with you, I see 3 choices for the grinder. The first one is Blastoise, but again, I don't think Blastoise is good enough in best of 3 to go undefeated. And the grinder this year is going to be longer than last year. You're probably looking at about 7 or 8 rounds rather than 5. I wouldn't play Blastoise. Now, the 2 decks which I think are most viable are Plasma and Darkrai. And both these decks have the same thing in common. They're unlikely to be donked, although having said that, Darkrai's still got 70 HP Sableye. They're unlikely to be donked, they only play basics, they're more consistent, you don't have to struggle to set up that stage 2, and they're fast and can take quick prizes and win in a short game 3 or a sudden death scenario. And that's what you're looking for. You do not want to go to game 3 with a slow deck. I mean, my deck last year, as I said, was focused on Tornado CX. I ended up going to 1 game 3, and it was against an incredibly good player in Faris Sakum. And I started Tornado CX, he started Darkrai, and he didn't play Lost Remover to get rid of my DCEs. And I knew that no matter how it went, I was going to win that game. Because my damage was going to stack up faster than his, and the only way you could do it would be to put down something like a Shaman to move the energy to a new Pokemon, in which case I kill the Shaman. There was no way he was going to win that game. Because my list was focused around the big Pokemon. I only played 2 Celebi. So I was more likely to start with a big Pokemon. And that's what won me the sudden death. If I'd have started with something like Celebi, because I was playing the full 4, then I probably would have lost that sudden death. But that doesn't matter because I didn't. So that's why those 2 decks are good. As for which one, I honestly couldn't tell you. I told you I liked that Darkrai with the Caldeo and the Lost Remover. But similarly, I don't think that's great in the mirror or great against Blastoise. Do you really want to take that risk? I can't give you a grinder deck for this year. Last year I could have, this year I can't. So I'm saying a very consistent Plasma list focused on things like Absol and Kyurem, or a Darkrai list focused on speed with at least 2 Caldeo and Enhanced Hammer. Because without the Enhanced Hammer, you've got an unfavourable Plasma matchup, and that's going to be the most popular deck in the grinder. And without Caldeo, you're facing an unpopular Gothitelle matchup, and there's going to be a lot more Gothitelle in the grinder this year than there was Vileplume Exalgor last year. It's a more viable deck. I still don't think any will get through the grinder. I mean, if you look at last year, there were 8 people got through the grinder. There were 3 Darkrai Mewtwo, 2 CMT, 2 Eels, I think it might have been another Darkrai, you know. But they were the only decks that made it through. The Eels did manage to avoid getting donked. The CMT, well, there was one which I told you about, and there was Stefan Tobacco, who actually played a 1-1 SB online in case he played these Vileplume Exalgor decks, which was something I didn't want to do, but Stefan made it all the way to top 8 of World, and you can see his games on the Top Cut website. He got very unlucky in the end. You know, he had 2 games where he drew pretty dead. Otherwise, I think he would have stood a very good chance of winning the whole thing, because he would have had a positive Darkrai matchup like I did. And then there was a Darkrai Mewtwo, which again was just fast and consistent. So there's the grinder. In other random grinder tips, where are we to? Wear a watch, be aware of time. It's best of 3. It's timed. Don't lose a long game if you can't afford to. Time it, so if you're going to lose the first game, either quit or time it so that you are going to go first. Similarly, if you win the first game, you're going to lose the second game. Don't lose on time. If you lose on time, it will go to sudden death and you'll flip for who goes first. If you lose the first game, you want to win the second game on time so that the third game goes to a flip. If you win the first game, you're only going to go to game 3 if you lose, but you want to lose properly. You don't want to lose on time. Because if you lose properly, i.e. you scoop, or your opponent takes all their prizes, or benches you, or something, then you get to go first in game 3. And we all know how big an advantage going first is. Make sure you go first. Now, I made this mistake last year. I won game 1. I lost game 1. And then I won game 2. And then I managed to actually win the flip and go first. But I was lucky. Try and control so that you go first if you go to a game 3. But have a watch. Please wear a watch. Keep calm. It's a long tournament. It's a stressful tournament. It's an incredibly stressful tournament because if you lose, you're out. And that's the same every single game. What I'm going to tell you is that you have to keep calm and just play. Don't expect to get through the grind, because if you expect to get through, you're going to be nervous. I mean, in my personal run of the grinder last year, looking at the people I beat and the people they beat, there was Frank Diaz, who got third at Worlds a couple years ago, and grinded in that same year. There was Faris Sakoum, who is one of the best players in the UK. There were other good players you saw losing round one in the grinder, like Drew from the Top Cut. So, Yamato didn't make it through the grinder last year. Good players are going to fall by the wayside. There is no guarantee of anyone getting through. Keep calm, don't expect to win, and just play as well as you can. I had the most stressful game I've probably ever had. Game 1 of the last round of the grinder, where it was win and you're in Worlds. I drew as dead as I've ever drawn, and you can hear the whole story on last year's podcast. The point was, I got a lucky break in that game, won the first game, was incredibly stressed, and then I had to win another game to get through, so I calmed down and I carried on. Don't worry about what anyone else is playing in the grinder. Until the last few games, there are going to be a lot of players and a lot of decks, and you're only going to be playing one of them. Don't worry about what everyone else is playing, it doesn't matter. If you're playing in the grinder, don't go run around trying to get information on what everyone else is playing. It doesn't matter to you. There might be 99 Darkrai decks and one Plasma deck, doesn't mean you're going to face Darkrai. And eat and drink. I had a lovely lady called Maureen last year who ran out and got me a Subway halfway through the grinder, for which I will be eternally indebted to her, because that kept me nice and focused. And my last little tip, let your friends know if you've won or not, because I don't like being that guy who wins and shouts in someone's face, because especially in the grinder, I've just knocked you out the grinder, you're not playing in Worlds this year, in your face, not a nice thing to say to somebody. So I don't put on a particularly happy face, I shake their hand, I have a bit of a chat to them, and then my friends got annoyed at me because they thought I'd lost when I actually hadn't. So give your mates a little thumbs up or something if you don't want to be that guy that shouts in people's faces. And that's pretty much it, to be honest with you. Oh, one last thing, don't play Life Dew. It worked brilliantly at US Nationals, no one expected it, no one played Tool Scrapper. Now that Life Dew was in the most successful Plasma list, there's going to be a lot more Tool Scrapper, and that means Life Dew more often than not is going to be a wasted ace spec. There is one card in your list that you cannot afford to waste, that's your ace spec. So, don't waste your ace spec, don't play Life Dew. That might make Garbodor less viable, who knows. Garbodor's always going to be a fringe deck anyway. But if you're playing Garbodor, bear in mind there's going to be more Tool Scrapper. And that's about it. If you're going to Worlds, I am insanely jealous of you. I wish I was joining you, and I'm incredibly upset that I won't be there. But actually in the morning I'm flying off to Spain for 2 weeks with my lovely girlfriend, so quite frankly, life could be worse. I'll be following Worlds on the internet, and I'll be doing a very comprehensive podcast straight after Worlds on that weekend, the week after Worlds, about 4 days after. Now, obviously I'm not going to be at Worlds as I've just said, but I've got a lot of people I know going out to Worlds, so do rest assured I'll be getting you all the pertinent information and sharing it with you on next week's podcast. It'll be like I was there, but you just won't have to sit through a tournament report, so it might even be better for you. As I've said, if there's anyone listening going, anything you can give me from World, pictures, interviews with anybody, video, anything you can give me, chuck my way, ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or tweet me at the Wassy. If you're unsure of how to get large videos, etc. to me, let me know, and I'll talk you through it. I can't guarantee I'll use it on the podcast, but if nothing else, I'll be very interested. And if you're going out and you listen to this podcast, I want a tournament report. I love it when listeners do well. I had a listener in the top 64 of US Nats, 2 listeners in Top Cut at UK Nationals, well, several listeners in fact, but 2 people who have been listening and tweeting me loads, and a loyal listener went and won South African Nationals. So it'd be lovely if we could have some PTCG radio representatives doing well in Worlds this year. Don't forget to check out my YouTube channel and subscribe. I am going to be updating a little bit Twitter and all that in the next couple of weeks, but I am going to be going a little bit dark the next couple of weeks because I'm going to be on holiday. I will have internet though, so if you email me, tweet me, etc., I will get it. Thank you very much for listening. Good luck at Worlds. Remember, there's no PTCG Radio next week, but I'll be back in 2 weeks. Get in touch with me in the meantime. Let me know anything you can about Worlds. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.